Hello? Hello? Is this emergency services? Please, you've got to help me. There's something unbelievable out here.
In the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, a group of hunters tracks a rare wolf species, unaware of the terror that awaits. Their jubilation turns to dread as they kill a wolf, only to awaken a monstrous legend. As night falls, they are stalked by a colossal, vengeful werewolf, part of an ancient, hidden lineage. Lost and hunted, they face a cunning predator in a spine-chilling game of survival. One by one they disappear, dragged into the darkness. Will any survive this nightmare, or will they become mere whispers in the forest? Prepare for a heart-pounding journey into the unknown, where every step could be your last. Welcome to the terror of the Howling Shadows. In the fading light of a late autumn afternoon, a rugged group of hunters trudged through the dense underbrush of the Appalachian wilderness. They were a mix of seasoned locals and out-of-town enthusiasts, brought together by a common goal: to track down a rare species of wolf rumoured to roam these parts. Among them was John, a grizzled veteran of countless hunts, his eyes sharp and movements deliberate. Beside him, Mike, a younger but equally skilled hunter, carried a high-powered rifle, his excitement barely contained. As they moved deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, and the forest seemed to close in around them. Tales of mysterious creatures and unexplained occurrences in these mountains were common in local lore. "You know," Mike said, breaking the silence, "they say this is Bigfoot territory." John chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to blend with the rustling leaves. "Bigfoot, huh? Well, we're not here for fairy tales. Keep your eyes peeled for that wolf." The group continued, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. Hours passed, and the light dimmed, turning the forest into a shadowy labyrinth. As the hunters navigated the terrain, a sudden movement caught their attention. A wolf, its coat a mix of grey and brown, stepped into a clearing. It was a magnificent creature, but to the hunters, it was the target they had been seeking. Without hesitation, Mike raised his rifle, took aim, and fired. The shot echoed through the trees, startling a flock of birds into flight. The wolf collapsed, motionless. The group approached, cautiously, confirming their success. "We got it!" exclaimed Mike, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. The hunters gathered around the fallen animal, their expressions a mix of satisfaction and relief. John knelt beside the wolf, examining it. "It's just a regular wolf, but a fine specimen," he said, patting Mike on the back. As they prepared to leave, the forest seemed to come alive with strange sounds, distant howls that sent shivers down their spines. They looked at each other, unease creeping into their previously triumphant mood. "Probably just other wolves," muttered one of the hunters, trying to sound convinced. But John, his experienced eyes scanning the darkening woods, wasn't so sure. A sense of foreboding settled over him as the howls continued, echoing through the trees like a mournful lament. Unbeknownst to them, their hunt had awakened something ancient and terrifying in the heart of the Appalachian wilderness. As night fell, the hunters would soon find themselves no longer the predators, but the prey, in a deadly game of survival against a foe far beyond their wildest imaginations. Ah, my dear nocturnal scholars of the macabre, it's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. Now shall we delve deeper into the abyss. Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. The atmosphere among the hunters had shifted palpably. The triumphant air that had followed their successful hunt was now tinged with an uneasy tension. The howls, distant, clear, continued to pierce the twilight. "I don't like this," muttered Robert, the oldest member of the group. His voice, usually steady and commanding, now carried an edge of fear. "We need to get out of here. Fast." The others nodded in agreement, their earlier bravado fading rapidly. They began to pack up, moving with a haste that betrayed their growing anxiety. The forest, once familiar and navigable, now seemed alien and menacing. As they hurriedly retraced their steps, Mike, the youngest hunter, paused. "Wait, what's that?" His voice was barely a whisper, his finger pointing towards a dense thicket. The group froze, straining their eyes into the gloom. There, between the tangled branches, was a faint outline. Something large, much larger than any wolf, was watching them. It was still and silent, a shadow among shadows, yet its presence was unmistakable. A wave of fear swept over the hunters. They knew the wilderness. They understood the dangers it held, but this was different. This was something they couldn't explain. "Let's move," John hissed, breaking the tense silence. They quickened their pace, but as they did, a disorienting sensation overtook them. Paths that should have been familiar now seemed foreign. Landmarks they had passed earlier were nowhere to be seen. The woods had somehow changed, or perhaps it was their perception, altered by fear and the encroaching darkness. Panic began to set in as they realized they were lost. The comforting logic of the experienced hunter was replaced by a primal fear of the unknown. The howls continued, closer now, a haunting chorus that seemed to come from all directions. Then, another sighting. Sarah, the group's tracker, caught a glimpse of something in the distance. A fleeting shadow, moving with a grace and speed that was almost ghostly. It was stalking them. She was sure of it. The realization hit them like a physical blow. They were being hunted. Whatever was out there in the darkness. It was no ordinary predator. It was something else. Something far more sinister. The hunters, once confident in their mastery of the wilderness, now felt like intruders in a world where they were no longer welcome. The roles had reversed, and as the darkness deepened, so did their fear. They were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted, in a game where the stakes were their very lives. The dense canopy of the Appalachian forest seemed to close in around the group of hunters, its oppressive darkness intensifying their growing sense of dread. They moved through the underbrush in a tight formation, each person's senses heightened to the eerie sounds of the nocturnal wilderness. Suddenly, Mike, the sharp-eyed member of the group, halted in his tracks. "Wait, where's Eric?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. The group scanned their surroundings, but there was no sign of Eric. He had been right beside them just moments ago. Tension mounted as they called out his name. Then, slicing through the silence, came a blood-curdling scream. It was distant, yet unmistakably human, filled with pain and terror. Without a second thought, the hunters abandoned some of their heavier equipment and sprinted towards the source of the scream, their hearts pounding in their chests. "Let's all stick together," John commanded, his voice a mix of fear and resolve. But as they ran, the origin of the scream seemed to shift, disorienting them further. It was as if the sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The forest, with its gnarled trees and dense undergrowth, played tricks on their senses, making it impossible to pinpoint the direction. Exhausted and increasingly disoriented, the hunters realized they were hopelessly lost. Their equipment, now limited, had offered little comfort against the unknown terror lurking in the darkness. With a sense of impending doom hanging over them, they huddled together, their guns loaded and ready. The forest was eerily silent for a moment, and then, from the trees, came a soft, sinister rustling. The hunters tensed. Every muscle in their bodies coiled like springs. Suddenly, the body of their missing friend, Eric, was hurled from the darkness, landing with a sickening thud in front of them. His lifeless eyes stared up at the night sky, his body a testament to the brutal force that had taken him. A wave of horror swept over the group. It was clear now. They were not just being hunted. They were being toyed with. This creature, this giant werewolf, was not simply a predator. It was intelligent, cunning, and it was playing a sadistic game with them. "It's toying with us," whispered Sarah, her voice barely audible. The realization was paralyzing. They were not facing a mere animal. They were up against a creature that understood fear and how to use it as a weapon. As they stood there, frozen in terror, the howls resumed, closer than ever before. The hunters were trapped in a nightmare, far from the safety of civilization, facing an enemy that was as elusive as it was deadly. The line between hunter and hunted had been irreversibly blurred, and as the night wore on, their fight for survival had only just begun. "Let's move," Mike urged, his voice strained with urgency. "If we stay here, we're sitting ducks." The remaining hunters, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion, nodded in agreement. Despite their terror, they knew they had to rely on their skills to survive. John, taking the lead, suggested they use the stars to navigate. Their tracking skills, honed through years of experience, were now their lifeline. They moved cautiously, eyes and ears straining for any sign of the creature that hunted them. After what felt like hours, the dense trees gave way to a clearing. In the middle stood an old barn, its wood weathered and grey, a relic abandoned to the ravages of time. Relief washed over the hunters at the sight of potential shelter. "Let's take up camp here," John decided, his voice carrying a faint glimmer of hope. They entered the barn cautiously, guns at the ready. Inside, the air was thick with the musty scent of old wood and decay. The weak moonlight, filtering through the cracks, revealed a few straw beds scattered around. One of them was enormous, far larger than any human would need. A chill ran down their spines. "Wait, is this their den?" whispered Sarah, her eyes wide with fear. Before anyone could respond, a piercing scream shattered the silence. They spun around, but it was too late. Another member of their group, James, was gone, taken without a trace. Panic set in. The realization that the creature could move so silently, so swiftly, was terrifying. They were in its territory, possibly its very lair, and it was picking them off one by one. The hunters, now reduced to just John, Mike, and Sarah, knew they couldn't stay in the barn. It was no longer a shelter. It was a trap. With their hearts pounding and their bodies fueled by adrenaline, they fled into the night. As they ran, the howls followed them, a constant reminder that the giant werewolf was never far behind. The hunters, once confident and in control, were now reduced to desperate prey, running for their lives in a forest that had become a labyrinth of fear and despair. The chapter closes with the 3 remaining hunters, their faces haunted by the loss of their friends and the relentless pursuit of the creature. They knew their chances of making it out alive were dwindling, but they were determined to fight until the very end. The night was far from over, and their nightmare was only intensifying. Breathless and spent from their relentless flight, the 2 remaining hunters, John and Mike, came to a halt in a small clearing. Sarah, her face pale and eyes wide with fear, broke the eerie silence. "It's because we killed that wolf. Maybe it was its cub or something." Her voice was trembling, filled with a mixture of guilt and terror. Suddenly, She turned towards the dark, foreboding trees and screamed, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." John, though shaken, tried to maintain a semblance of control. "Get a grip, Sarah," he said sternly. "We're making it out of here." He paused, looking up at the night sky. "I've been tracking the stars, southeast, towards the road and our truck. We should be close." With renewed, albeit fragile determination, they stumbled forward, navigating the treacherous forest terrain. Then, to their disbelief, they found themselves back where they had left their equipment earlier. "This is impossible," John muttered, his brow furrowed in confusion. A more chilling discovery awaited them. The carcass of the wolf they had killed was gone, vanished without a trace. "It's like it never happened," Mike said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Grab what we need from the pack and let's keep moving," John instructed, trying to keep his voice steady. As they hurriedly gathered their supplies, Sarah heard a noise in the trees, a low, menacing growl. Overcome with guilt and despair, she cried out, "I'm sorry," and ran towards the sound. "No, Sarah," Mike shouted, but it was too late. The darkness swallowed her before they could react. Frozen in horror, John and Mike heard Sarah's distant voice, "I'm sorry," followed by a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the forest. "Let's move," John said, his voice strained. With heavy hearts, they continued their desperate trek, guided only by the faint light of the stars. They pushed through the undergrowth, every sound, every shadow a potential threat. Their goal was clear: reach the road, find their truck, escape this nightmare. But the forest seemed endless, and the howling that had haunted them all night was now a constant reminder of the terror lurking in the shadows. As they ran, the line between reality and nightmare blurred. The once familiar wilderness had transformed into a labyrinth of fear, with each step leading them further into uncertainty. The road, their last hope, seemed an eternity away, and the night was far from over. John and Mike, their flashlights' beam barely piercing the overwhelming darkness, raced through the forest. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, the sound of their own heartbeats thundering in their ears. Behind them, the sound of heavy, hot panting grew ominously closer, a relentless reminder of the nightmare that pursued them. The suspense was almost unbearable. Every shadow a potential harbinger of death, every noise a signal of impending doom. Then, through the trees, they glimpsed salvation. Their truck, parked by the road, a beacon of hope in the unrelenting darkness. "There!" Mike exclaimed, pointing towards it. John, a few steps ahead, turned to Mike with a look of relief. "We made it," he said, the words barely leaving his lips before an unimaginable horror unfolded. Without warning, John was lifted into the air from behind. Blood spurted from his mouth as he convulsed in agony. Standing behind him was a sight so terrifying it defied belief. A werewolf, easily 8 feet tall, broad and muscular, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. In a desperate act of defiance, John raised his gun and fired. The bullets seemed to have no effect on the monstrous creature. With a swift, brutal swipe, the werewolf struck John, sending his body flying towards the truck. Injured but still conscious, John crawled towards the truck, his body screaming in pain with every movement. As he reached the driver's side, a gut-wrenching realization hit him. The keys were in Mike's pocket. He turned, his eyes searching the dark forest. There, in the trees, the werewolf watched him, its gaze cold and calculating. John, his options dwindling, pulled out his phone with trembling hands. With the last of his strength, he dialed for help, his voice a mix of fear and desperation. The chapter ends with John's call for help echoing into the phone, his fate hanging in the balance. The werewolf, a shadowy figure in the darkness, continued to watch, its intentions unknown. The night had taken its toll, And now, John's survival rested on a thread of hope, as thin and fragile as the beam of his dying flashlight.
Hello? Hello? Is this emergency services? Please, you've got to help me. There's something unbelievable out here.
Sir, try to remain calm. Can you tell me your location and what's happening?
I'm at the edge of the pine woods, near the old miller's farm. There's a giant wolf, but it's not just a wolf. It's standing on two legs, like a person, but it's massive. Its eyes are glowing red, and it's looking right at me.
A wolf on two legs? Sir, are you safe? Can you find somewhere to hide?
I'm hiding behind my car, but it's seen me. Oh God, it's snarling. Its teeth are as big as my fingers. Please send someone. I don't think it's going to leave. I'm really scared.
Our help is on the way, sir. Stay on the line with me. Keep yourself hidden and don't make any sudden movements. We're going to get you out of there.
Please hurry. I don't know how much longer I can stay hidden. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. A monster!
As John clung to his phone, the operator's voice, a distant lifeline in the encroaching darkness, he noticed something that chilled him to the core. Not just the huge werewolf, but other pairs of glowing eyes, all staring at him from the tree line. He could make out at least 4 or 5 more wolves, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. Then, a terrifying sound shattered the night's silence. The sound of the large werewolf charging towards the car. It was deafening, like a large horse thundering across the ground. The creature hit the truck with such force that it pushed the vehicle into the road. In an instant, the werewolf grabbed John by the leg, lifting him upside down. John's world turned into a dizzying whirl of fear and despair as he was carried toward the tree line. He screamed, a gut-wrenching cry of terror. No! He knew, in that horrifying moment, that he was about to become a quick meal for the monstrous pack. Time passed, and the forest reclaimed its eerie calm. When the police arrived, the scene that greeted them was one of chaos and unexplained horror. The truck was pushed into the road, its doors ajar, and a trail of blood led ominously into the trees. "Anyone there?" an officer called out, his voice tinged with unease. But there was no reply, just the haunting stillness of the forest. "I'm not going in there," one officer said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Me neither," replied the other, his eyes scanning the dark woods. The story ends with the officers standing by the road, the mystery of the missing hunters hanging heavy in the air. The forest remained silent, guarding its secrets, as the night enveloped everything in its dark embrace. The hunter's fate, a chilling testament to the ancient and terrifying creatures that lurked in the depths of the Appalachian wilderness, was sealed, lost to the shadows of the night.
And if you're still looking to fulfill your thirst for more horror, don't forget to check out this next video, unless of course you're frozen with fear already.